Philosophically, what does Superman represent to people?
A friend, and that's what people really need most. They don't need a strong arm, one-man vigilante force. They need a friend. We're living in an age when people are basically afraid of contact with each other. They're afraid. People live in cities, they don't even know their neighbors. They're afraid to go out in the street. Something might happen to them. Life is overwhelming. Even the bank doesn't know who you are. And it's like, we run around scared a lot, particularly those of us who live in cities. And America was founded on the virtues of a helping hand, of going 5 miles to lend your neighbor a donkey or whatever he needed. And I think that is that kind of virtue that's at the bottom. That's the heart of Superman. The genuine love of people, and that you always know he's your friend.
It's probably no secret for me to say that I am a huge fan of Superman. Ever since his 1938 debut in the pages of Action Comics, the Man of Steel has defined and redefined what it means to be a superhero, a trailblazer for the entire genre, both in terms of comics, pioneering the very idea of superhero comic books as a whole, and also superheroes on screen, with Richard Donner's 1978 blockbuster Superman the Movie reframing how the world perceived comic book characters in feature films. Whether you are a fan of the Man of Tomorrow or not, it's hard to ignore the fact that Superman has had an incredible impact on the medium of comics and superheroes, both in terms of graphic novels and their wider pop culture appeal for the last 8 decades. This unwavering symbol of heroism has evolved throughout his 82 years of existence, from the manifestation of the dreams of 2 young Jewish creators to the flag bearer of not just an entire industry, but to the very idea of what it means to stand for truth and justice. Superman is, and always has been, hope and heroism personified, and that's why, in my opinion, he isn't just the original, but the ultimate superhero. So now you get a sense of my feelings towards the character. I'm sure you can understand my frustration when I see people say things like Superman is boring, outdated, or not relevant anymore. And while these claims have been around for decades now, they do seem to have re-emerged in light of Warner Bros.' decision to move away from Superman as a key part of their DC films, putting the character aside as they instead focus on other heroes. So, with the cinematic future of the Man of Steel in the air, and many seemingly questioning what role Superman can play in a modern world, I figured now would be a good time to break down the reasons as to why Superman still matters, and still holds such an integral place in the superhero and entertainment landscapes. So, in this video, I want to discuss Superman as a character, delving into the real-life history of his creation, and try to understand the ethics and the meaning at the heart of the world's first superhero. Then we'll look at some of my favourite iterations of Superman and how they managed to capture the spirit of the character best, and then compare those with some of the more modern adaptations of the character that we've seen on screen, and use those comparisons to try and find a way to build a future for Superman that will give long-time fans the hero that they deserve. I want to start by asking you one simple question. What does Superman mean to you? Everyone likely has their own memory or their own moment where the Man of Steel personally touched them in some form. Throughout his 82 years of publication, Superman has been a flag bearer for the values and ethics that we all hold dear. Courage, bravery, honesty, truth, justice, and hope. Hope especially has been the driving force behind Clark Kent ever since he first leapt onto the pages of comics in a single bound. And it's no coincidence that a hero that personifies hope the best came to be at a time when the people of the United States and the world needed hope arguably more than ever. Superman's first appearance came in June of 1938, though the ideas that came to be the last son of Krypton were developed by Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster years earlier. Siegel and Shuster brought this incredible hero to life at a time in which the world outside seemed dark and the future bleak. And to understand Superman, I think it's important to understand the context and the world in which he was born into, and how it shaped Siegel and Shuster's imaginations into creating the ultimate superhero. Superman as a concept was Siegel and Schuster's response to the hardships that faced the people of America during the height of the Great Depression. He was a gift from the sky, arriving to lift people up and inspire them to never give up, even during a period of such hardship and deprivation. It's no secret that the Great Depression and the years that followed it were incredibly hard for the working class people of the United States. The 1929 Wall Street crash decimated the nation's once booming economy and brought with it the longest and most severe economic depression ever experienced by the industrialised Western world. This was a time where people were crying out for escapism and heroism. President Roosevelt echoed this in 1936 when he stated that when the spirit of the people is lower than at any other time during this depression, it is a splendid thing that for just 15 cents, an American can go to a movie and forget his troubles. Cinema was one form of escapism during this time, but comic books were another way of letting go of reality for many. And created by two poor Jewish teenagers living in Cleveland, it's no coincidence that Superman arrived on the newsstands to offer this mixture of real-world hope and fantasy that was needed by so many. In some ways, it could be said that Superman wasn't just a response to the economic decline of the 1930s, but to the spark of hope echoed by Roosevelt himself, who, upon his inauguration in 1933, began to attempt to solve America's hardships with a series of relief programs and reforms known as the New Deal. To many, Roosevelt's New Deal at the time seemed like a shining light in such a dark period of American history, and much like how these legislations aim to protect working class people and offer relief to those devastated by the Depression, a heroic figure flew down from the sky, doing just that in the pages of comic books. I'm not the first person to make this comparison either. Bradford Wright, in his book Comic Book Nation, argues that at the height of the golden age of comics, superheroes assumed the role of the super New Dealers, fighting a more literal form of the very battle being waged by Roosevelt's government at this time. Likewise, Tessa Probitkin, who in their article Superman, the New Deal Symbol of the American Way, states that the Superman phenomenon reflected the challenges facing Americans in the 1930s, while celebrating the nobility of the common man. People could relate to Superman, kids imagined that they could fight the same bad guys presented in comics, and adults dreamt of dealing with the tough social issues in their lives the same way as Superman did. By conquering the challenges facing Americans in the 1930s and celebrating the goodness of the common man, Superman came to symbolise the American way. Superman was created to be a manifestation of the hope that many Americans felt towards the New Deal at this time. Early Superman stories saw the hero fight against corrupt politicians and business owners, war profiteers and factory owners exploiting their staff. These first few issues weren't filled with Superman using his powers to fight monsters, aliens, or mad scientists, but doing what Superman always has and always will do: protect and fight for the everyman. And while his adventures became more dramatic and exciting as the years went on, with the stakes continuously being raised as the Man of Steel became more powerful, this core part of the character never really faded away. Superman was a hero for the people, and the champion of the oppressed. And I think it's important to emphasise the history and the real-world context of Superman's background, because it forms the basis of the moral compass that the character has been so renowned for. The best Superman stories, regardless of the medium they're told in, have always maintained the humanity at the heart of Clark Kent's character, and understood not only why Superman loves the world, but why the world too loves Superman. And while there are a great number of examples that I could point towards that demonstrate this in the comics or many of the beloved animated series, I think there's one clear version that springs to mind when I think of encapsulating what Superman best means and represents. Before the 1970s, the concept of a big-budget live-action superhero blockbuster seemed almost laughable. While there had been some mainstream hits, namely the Adam West-led Batman TV series and spin-off film, it's fair to say that superheroes had never really been treated with the level of reverence and adoration that we've come now to expect. All of that changed though in 1978, when a film dared to tell the world, "You'll believe a man can fly," as Richard Donner's Superman the movie hit theatres and changed everything we know about comic book characters on screen. I know at this point, some 42 years on from its release, it seems like a given for me to say that Donner's original Superman film is great. But I think it's still worth saying. This film brought Superman to life in a way that fans could only dream. Christopher Reeve's performance as the Man of Steel wasn't just good, it became the near definitive Superman. But beyond that, what I think is most impressive about this film is the heart at the crux of the story and the characters. Superman the movie is a blockbuster in every sense of the word, but it doesn't sacrifice the morals and the emotion of Superman and his relationship with humanity for the sake of simplicity or entertainment. Instead, Donner manages to almost perfectly translate everything that makes Superman such a beloved symbol of hope from the comics to the big screen, in a film gushing in adoration for the character, so much so that it's essentially a love letter to everything that makes Superman great. There is honestly an abundance of amazing scenes from this film that I could use to demonstrate my point, but I think my favourite, and the scene that demonstrates this best, is actually the interview sequence between Superman and Lois Lane atop her balcony. Now, my friend Alex from High Top Films already made a great video analysing this scene, but I want to talk about it in relation to how it manages to distill and break down everything that makes Superman such a terrific character to such a pure and simple form. This is one of the few times throughout the movie that I think we truly get to see Clark Kent as himself, as opposed to playing the role of Clark bumbling reporter or Superman the unstoppable force for good. He's simply being himself and opening up to Lois. Everything from the boyish innocence behind Clark's voice as he jokes to an obviously charmed Lois Lane, to the earnesty and sincerity when he tells her that he fights for truth, justice and the American way. It's hard not to smile watching this sequence play out. Beyond his powers and his responsibilities as a hero, it reminds us that Superman is deep down an everyman. He's a kid from Kansas, blessed with the power to be the hero that everyone else wishes they could be, with the strength not to waver when he's called upon to save the day. Clark isn't any better than us, he's just the best of us, and this scene really encapsulates that. At no point does Superman ever seem or act like he's above or better than Lois. Everything he says in response to her is done so with complete warmth and sincerity. He views her as an equal, and he's actively trying to impress her and make her smile. And Lois goes from viewing him as an alien with strange abilities to a kind and caring man just trying to do the right thing. Now, am I saying that Superman the movie as a whole is the perfect Superman story? Well, not really, because there is no single way to tell a Superman story. But it does capture what I think makes the Man of Tomorrow so relatable and so earnest, and does so better than any of the later adaptations of the character we've seen on screen. And while it's true that each different version of Superman that we've had on film has their own individual merits, I don't think any of them have managed to encapsulate the heart at the core of Superman's character in the way that Reeve and Donner did. This now 40-plus-year-old version of the character feels truly timeless and carries with him not just wonder and awe, but the importance of kindness, warmth and hope. This message was central to Donner's interpretation of Superman, and I think they're feelings that haven't become any less important or needed now than they were back in 1978. In an article written for the AV Club, writer Tom Brahan boldly opens by stating, "Zack Snyder hates Superman." And this line in particular has played in my mind for a while now. It sounds like an insult at first, but Brahan means it in a positive sense. He states that Snyder, both in 2013's Man of Steel and 2016's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, made a Superman movie faithful to his own tastes and ideas, a grand American myth his own way, and describing his iteration of the character as a relatively uncompromising auteurist vision. I don't think it's especially controversial for me to say that Zack Snyder's Superman is unique from the versions that came before it. While it's not a mischaracterization, I do think that the filmmaker boldly tries to examine the factors that make Superman who he is, and in a way, tries to pull at them to see if they unravel. Man of Steel and BVS have often been described as a deconstruction of the Superman character, taking this all-good and all-powerful being, placing him in our bitter and cynical world, and seeing if he manages to maintain his virtue. In fact, while the execution of it may not be perfect, this line of thinking is exactly what Lex Luthor attempts to prove throughout Batman v Superman. Snyder's approach to storytelling throughout his filmography has at times been quite cynical, harsh and dark, especially in his depictions of heroes and their place in the world. And this approach, when meshed with an almost unstoppable force for good like Superman, can make for a very interesting conversation about staying good in a troubled world. In his two films, I'm not counting Justice League for obvious reasons, it's almost as if Snyder's asking whether we deserve a hero like Superman to save us, or whether we'd end up shunning and vilifying him out of fear. There are some obvious Christ parallels to this, but I think it's a really interesting way of recontextualizing Superman and examining what would happen if he existed in a world that didn't believe in the things that he stood for. However, while I think it's an interesting way of analysing the character, I honestly disagree with an element of how Zack ultimately views Superman. Through watching his two films, I get a sense that Snyder views Superman as a god amongst men, coming down to earth a la Christ to save and redeem us, and the burden of responsibility that comes when he's forced to question his own place as a symbol of hope in a largely hopeless world. While in comparison, I've always viewed Superman a little differently. To me, Superman isn't a god sent to Earth. He's a kid from Kansas, an immigrant raised by humans as a human, using the gift of his two backgrounds, his Kryptonian powers and his human morality, to be a shining example of what it means to be a good person, using his gifts to protect the home that he actually has the power to save. Now, this isn't me saying that Snyder's version of Superman is objectively wrong, because it's not. It's subjective and therefore an equally valid interpretation of the character to mine. But I think that for all the interesting questions that a deconstructed Superman can ask, it loses a key aspect of what makes the character so beloved: hope. And I think in our own dark and cynical world, a little bit of escapism is needed, in a Superman that can lift us up and inspire us to be on his level, instead of seeing him be brought down to ours. So, if Superman is still relevant and the messages and the meaning at the heart of the character are still important to audiences today, then I think it's only a matter of time before he returns to the big screen. Although Warner Brothers seems to believe that they have to find a way to fix the character for modern audiences, I think the core aspects of Superman as he was created to be in the 1930s still ring true, maybe more so than ever. If you genuinely believe that the story of a refugee from a dying world, sent to Earth for a better life, raised by two small-town farmers with a strong sense of compassion, benevolence and a love of humanity, trying to be a hero and inspire hope in people as he fights the greedy and corrupt, is no longer relevant for modern audiences, then I don't think it's Superman who's out of touch. And I think for anyone to suggest that such a character has no place in modern pop culture fails to grasp the significance of Superman, what he stands for, and why he's remained so beloved since 1938. Superman is a symbol of hope for everyone, a reminder that we can all be a little kinder and a little more thoughtful. Inevitably though, Superman will return to the big screen, whether that be with Henry Cavill playing the role or not. Either way though, there's no shortage of great stories from the comic books that a future filmmaker could draw inspiration from, especially in a DC film landscape that appears to let the director's own vision take priority over interconnectivity. If there was ever a time to adapt a story like Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman for instance, it would be now. While there are plenty of amazing stories that the next person to tell a Superman story could use, All-Star and Jeff Loeb's Superman for All Seasons are two that stand out in particular to me. All-Star, for instance, is essentially a story about Superman's last year on Earth, with the once indestructible hero facing his own mortality, becoming more human in his dying days than ever before, and exploring how Superman's death will impact the world and what his legacy will be. All Seasons accomplishes similar. The comic explores Superman throughout spring, summer, fall and winter, focusing on how Clark interacts with and touches people in his life, with each season narrated by a different person close to him. It's not only a wonderful coming-of-age story, but it delves into not just Superman himself, but how he changes and impacts those around him, and makes their lives better by him not just being the Man of Steel, but being simply a good person. Stories such as these two demonstrate what I and so many others love about Superman best. And whatever approach the studio decides to take for the next Superman film, I think it's crucial that they make sure that Superman's morals and his humanity are at the forefront of the character. As Neil Gaiman described in response to the initial tweet that inspired this video, you don't make it relevant, you make it inspiring. And he's right, because when you boil it down to its simplest form, Superman is inspiring. Superman is hope, escapism, compassion, heroism and love. And as long as the world still has a place for all of those things, then the world will always need a Superman. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know, what does Superman mean to you? What are your favourite Superman stories? And what are your thoughts on the Richard Donner and the Zack Snyder versions of the character? I can't wait to hear what you have to say, so leave a comment down below and we'll have a chat about it. Thank you for the patience and waiting for this video. I know it's took a while to get out, but I wanted to make sure it was right, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was worth the wait. If you're new to the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button and turning the notify bell on so you stay up to date with all of the new videos we make, and there should be some other videos on screen right now that you might also enjoy if you did indeed enjoy this one. That's all for me. You can follow me on Twitter just at Owen Likes Comics, and until next time, take care and keep reading.